Welcome back. Now for the news in detail. We begin from United Kingdom, whose government has challenged opponents to bring it down or change the law on Brexit. Leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, says political outrage at the government's parliamentary suspension is phony. Rees-Mogg says the UK will leave the EU without an agreement on October 31st if the opposition fail to choose. He dismissed criticism of Parliament's suspension by Commons Speaker John Bercow as unconstitutional. Prime Minister Johnson's decision has sparked widespread public and political opposition. The decision is being challenged in court. A public petition has garnered more than 1 million signatures in less than 24 hours. It is attracting names at the rate of 1,000 per minute. Opposition Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn has requested an audience with the Queen. But Cabinet Minister Michael Gove has defended Johnson's move.
It's certainly not. The Prime Minister is clear that he wants to use a new parliamentary session in order to ensure that the people's priorities are met. But it's also the case that parliamentarians will have plenty of time when we come back next week to debate Brexit.
Well, all petitions that receive more than 100,000 signatures are considered by the UK's Parliament for debate. The Labour Party says it will seek an emergency debate on Brexit next week. Now, Pakistan has successfully carried out a night training launch of its surface-to-surface ballistic missile, Ghaznavi. Pakistan's military spokesman says the missile is capable of delivering multiple types of warhead up to targets up to 290 kilometers away. Prime Minister Imran Khan has praised the team involved in the successful test. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Kashmir Contact Group is likely to meet in September. Pakistan's Foreign Office spokesperson Mohammad Faisal says the foreign ministers' meeting will discuss the situation in occupied Kashmir. Speaking in Islamabad, Faisal said Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi will also brief the UN Human Rights Council on Kashmir soon. The spokesperson said Pakistan will only accept a UN Security Council-backed Kashmir solution. India leads the world in the number of internet shutdowns, according to the US non-profit Freedom House in New Delhi. Over 170 internet blackouts have been imposed on occupied Kashmir since 2014. New Delhi's latest lockdown and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir has now entered its 25th day. Freedom House says New Delhi usually cuts internet services ahead of expected dissent over its actions. India used the British colonial-era Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. The body's executive director Sundar Krishnan says the communication blackouts bring modern society to a grinding halt. The shutdowns have a compounding effect, disrupting business and education and demoralizing people. Now, meanwhile, Yemen's southern separatists have regained control of Aden after intense clashes with government forces. The separatists retook control of the port city after government coalition forces recaptured the city yesterday. The Southern Transitional Council says it has taken over all entrances to Aden. The separatists originally seized the interim capital earlier this month. Spokesperson Haitham Nizar said STC forces will now advance on the government-held provinces of Abyan and Shabwa. They were retaken by government troops earlier this week. Meanwhile, 16 people have been killed in a Syrian government airstrike in northwestern Italy province. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says 6 children were among the victims of the raid. Monitors say air raids provided cover for a ground assault on rebel-held Maret al-Numan. This town is on the strategic highway between Damascus and Aleppo. Government forces seized the nearby rebel stronghold of Khan Sheikhoun last week. Meanwhile, Syrian warplanes have hit rebel positions close to a Turkish military observation post in Idlib. Moving on, Turkey says it will not allow the US to delay its plan to set up a security safe zone in northeast Syria. In an interview, President Tayyip Erdogan has warned a hold-up will force Turkey to take unilateral action. President Erdogan says Turkish ground forces will soon enter the planned safe zone. He has also spoken on the telephone to US President Donald Trump about the ongoing battles in Idlib province. In a statement, the Turkish presidency said the two leaders agreed to protect civilians caught up in the fighting. In the meantime, the US Defense Secretary Mark Esper has expressed hope that Turkey will abandon an arms deal with Russia. The US excluded Turkey from its F-35 warplanes project in July after it took delivery of Russian S-400 air defense missiles. Now, senior American officials have distanced the US military from a series of Israeli drone strikes in Iraq and Syria. US Defense Secretary Mark Esper and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Joseph Dunford held a briefing in Washington. They said the US had nothing to do with the recent attacks. The US Defense Secretary said they are working with through Iraqi forces against militants. Iraq has expressed concern about Israeli attacks, calling them a violation of its sovereignty. In the meantime, displaced Iraqis living in refugee camps around the country are being sent home despite continuing violence. Iran says the United States will have to think of the 2015 nuclear deal if it wants to talk. Speaking in Kuala Lumpur, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Iran won't engage unless the US stops its economic terrorism. The Iranian Foreign Minister said sanctions must be lifted if any new negotiations are to begin. He said Iran is only interested in a result-oriented meeting. Zarif announced Iran will fast-track legal action against a British oil tanker Iran seized last month in Hormuz. He denied accusations it was behind attacks on 6 tankers in May and June. The Iranian foreign minister is on a 2-day official visit to Malaysia. The Chinese military has begun deploying fresh forces in Hong Kong amid massive anti-government protests. China's state media described the move as a routine annual rotation. It says the troops will carry out their duty to defend Hong Kong's sovereignty, security and progress. This is the 22nd rotation of Chinese forces since Beijing took control of Hong Kong from Britain in 1997. The fresh deployment comes days ahead of another scheduled protest march on Saturday. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy ship has sailed into the South China Sea amid trade tensions between Beijing and Washington. A U.S. official says the Labor-class guided missile destroyer conducted the operation. It says the operation was carried out to challenge excessive maritime claims and preserve access to waterways under international law. The busy waterway is a flashpoint in the U.S.-Chinese relationship. The U.S. accuses Beijing of militarizing the South China Sea by placing military installations on artificial islands and reefs. China says the construction is necessary for self-defense and accuses the U.S. of exacerbating tensions by sending warships. Italy's President Sergio Mattarella has given Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte the mandate to form a new government. Earlier, Conte's Five-Star Movement and Democratic Party have formed a coalition derailing the far-right League Party's bid to seize power. Mattarella met with Conte today to officially designate him as Prime Minister. Conte says the new administration will work on drawing up a budget and preventing sales tax hikes. It will also draft the agenda for the new ruling coalition and appoint a cabinet. PD and Five Star have avoided a snap election, but they disagree on many policy matters. The coalition deal was settled 2 weeks after the League Party withdrew from the Conte-led government. But League leader Matteo Salvini says the new ruling setup is fragile and unlikely to last. Moving on, Italy's outgoing Interior Minister Matteo Salvini has signed a decree banning another migrant rescue ship. The charity Mediterranea Saving Humans says the ship Merijonio is carrying 100 people. They were picked up off the Libyan coast yesterday when their rubber dinghy began to deflate. Among their number are 22 children and 8 pregnant women. The survivors say 6 people had drowned before the Merijonio came to their aid. Italy's anti-migrant Interior Minister Matteo Salvini has banned a number of rescue ships in recent months. but he will not be part of the new Italian government scheduled to take power today. Cuba has asked Canada to help end U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. The foreign ministers of the two countries have held 3 meetings since May on Caracas' impending crisis. Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez and Canada's Chrystia Freeland met in Havana. In a tweet, the Cuban Foreign Minister called the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela a violation of international law. Rodriguez said Washington's coercive measures against Caracas have damaged millions of Venezuelans. Canada's foreign ministry says the two sides will stay in contact and continue to exchange views over Venezuela. Now, more than 50 people have been abducted in a raid in a village in northwest Nigeria. Residents say the kidnapped people include pregnant women and children. A man who has seized but released by the attackers says at least 53 people were taken. Residents say they have already received ransom demands from the kidnappers. They say the attackers have also taken sheep, goats and food. Nigerian police say 15 women were abducted and 10 others were freed after a gun battle with the assailants. They say search parties have been sent into the surrounding bush to rescue the remaining victims. Coming up next in the bulletin after a short break is history has often been shaped by social movements. A hip-hop hub buzzes with stories in the local dialects. Welcome back now. Countries party to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species have given protection to 139 animal species, as this report explains more.
CITES regulates the buying and selling of species at risk of extinction around the world. This year, 183 states gathered to give protection to several wild animal species, including sharks, elephants and giraffes.
And successful at the end is also that the recognition that there is an urgency to the extinctions that we are facing, and that CITES can play a very strong role.
Animal rights activists welcomed the measures taken during the conference, while urging states to enforce them.
I think it was a fantastic week for wild animals in general. We have protection for over 100 species that did not have CITES protection before, and new protections for about 6 species. And so this is really exciting.
The countries also voted to impose a near-total ban on capturing African elephants from the wild. And they also agreed to strengthen protections for 18 threatened species of sharks and rays. NGOs say besides trade, climate change is putting endangered species at further risk, which also needs world attention.
History has often been shaped by social movements and the abolition of monarchies. A century after it happened in Germany, the fight to reclaim family heirlooms continues among the descendants of the ex-ruling family. This report has more.
Over a century ago, the House of Hohenzollern was Germany's royal ruling family. They lost power at the end of the First World War, but kept their properties in the country, while the ex-Kaiser was exiled in Belgium. After conquering Germany in 1945, the Soviets confiscated everything, and the Hohenzollerns want it back. At stake are fabulous palaces and thousands of priceless artifacts and artworks. The biggest prize up is the right of residence in Sicilienhof Palace near Berlin, site of 1945 Potsdam Conference.
In the 1926 treaty, a right of permanent residence was granted for the family of the Crown Prince and then the head of each family, a right guaranteed by the treaty. If you sit around a table and discuss all the claims, this is of course a legal position on which lawyers should in principle negotiate. This does not necessarily mean that you want to move into the castle.
The Hohenzollerns were kings of Prussia from 1701 and ruled Germany from 1871 to 1918. At the core of the ongoing fight is the accusation that Kaiser Wilhelm II was instrumental in starting World War I. Under a 1994 law, people whose property was expropriated by Soviet Union have a right to claim compensation. But this only applies if they did not lend considerable support to the Nazi regime.
There is a debate among historians about the controversial link between the Crown Prince and Nazism. Most of them still believe that there was a very strong link between the Nazi Party and the Crown Prince, although he was never a member of the party.
The wrangle may go on for years, but that's not much after a century-long dispute and a millennium of family history.
Now with the business stories, Japan has warned African leaders against accumulating too much debt. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says Tokyo is promoting quality infrastructure, exports and investments in Africa. Abe says if partner countries are in debt, it interferes with everyone's efforts to enter the market. Addressing leaders from African nations at a development conference in Yokohama, Abe introduced financing and insurance schemes. He also announced that Japan plans to train experts in 30 African countries in the next 3 years and managing risk and public debt. Abe aims to boost Japan's presence in promoting African market. South Korea's Supreme Court has ordered a retrial of Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Jae-Wai Lee over bribery charges. The court quashed an earlier decision to suspend Lee's 2.5-year sentence and send the case back to the lower courts. Lee was initially sentenced in 2017 to 5 years in prison. He was convicted of bribing former President Park Geun-hye to take control of Samsung Group. Lee was freed after a year in detention when the Appellate Seoul High Court halved his sentence and suspended it for 4 years. The top court says the High Court interpretation of what constitutes a bribe was too narrow. The decision has revived legal uncertainty around the country's largest company, just as they're navigating the global trade turmoil. Meanwhile, European stock markets are trading about 1% higher on soft inflation data. Slowing consumer prices, rises in Germany and Spain have boosted hopes for a European Central Bank stimulus in September. Most Asian stock markets have closed practically unchanged, with pessimism surrounding trade talks between the US and China. Traders say global investors are nervous because long-term US and German bond yields are close to record lows. Many economists see their inverted bond yield curves as evidence of a forthcoming economic downturn. Those worries have sent many investors scurrying to safe havens, pushing up the prices of precious metals. Oil futures have consolidated overnight, gained nearly 2% on Wall Street. Prices rose after US reported a much higher than expected drop in fuel inventories. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, viewers, with the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and updates, keep watching Indus News.